Hi, I'm Mary Scifres for Mary Scifres Ministries, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Reopening with Grace and Ease. Thanks for taking time to be with us today. I am grateful to welcome all of you as we explore this topic of how we can reopen our churches, our businesses, our schools, and our communities with grace and ease for all. Today, we're going to be talking about how can we reopen in a way that is life-giving and healthy for our parishioners and our customers and our staff and our community. We all know this has not been an easy season. And so when I've got to confess to you that when I first came up with this idea, my son mentioned it to one of the pastors that he works for. And that pastor laughed and said, well, that's not going to happen. But I do believe, and BG and I have talked about this several times, that it is possible for us to reopen in ways that welcome people back and include people fully wherever they're at and whatever they're going through and have gone through in the middle of all this pandemic. And that's what we want to talk about today and give you some hints on how you can begin reconnecting with your community, even rebuilding and restarting your community, and doing so with enough grace and ease that you and your sisters and brothers in leadership and on staff can also feel that grace and ease together, so that the leadership community is also rebuilding with strength and hope, as opposed to exhaustion and frustration. So I've named this, although I'm calling it Reopening with Grace and Ease, I also have called it the ABCs of Reopening with Grace and Ease, because we're going to be talking about 3 steps. One is to accept where people are at and the pace at which all of you are going to be reopening, to build at the pace that's right for you, building one step at a time, and to communicate clearly what it is that you'll be building together. So that's exactly where we'll start, but I'm going to start with a story called The Cookie Thief. And it's a story about a woman who is delayed in an airport. Back in the days, whenever we could all be at airports and sit at a coffee shop together, this woman found out her plane had been delayed 2 hours. She was pretty frustrated. She was pretty harried and thought, I think I'll treat myself to a coffee and some cookies. And so she goes and stands in that long line at the airport coffee shop, buys herself not just one cookie, but a 5-pack of cookies, thinking, I'm going to give myself a few cookies while I wait and a few cookies when I arrive, and her favorite coffee. And she looks around the busy coffee shop, finds a table where someone's sitting there, and she kind of gives him the look and he nods, and she sits across from him and proceeds to find a book to read. So she digs through her purse, pulls out her book, and sits down to start reading, and grabs one of the cookies from the cookie box that she put on the table. And the man across the table from her grabs another cookie from the same cookie box. She's a little shocked. She looks up from her book like, what the heck is going on here? But she's going to be stuck at this table with him for a long time. So she's like, whatever, it's a cookie. He can have the stupid cookie. So she's pretty irritated, but she keeps reading her book, eating her cookie. She hears on the loudspeaker that her delay has been extended. Thinks, I think I'll treat myself to another cookie. So she reaches in to grab another cookie and continues eating and reading. And lo and behold, the man across the table from her reaches in and takes cookie number 4, his second cookie. And she looks at him with such disgust on her face, and he just smiles at her with such grace and kindness that she's like, okay, he's a really nice guy, but he's stealing my cookies. It's okay. I probably don't need them. My waistline doesn't need them. I'm just going to go zen here. So pretty soon, she finally hears that announcement that her flight is boarding and that they are back on track for taking off soon. So she grabs up all of her stuff, throws her book in her bag, and before she can grab the cookie, the man grabs the 5th cookie, splits it in half, and hands her half of the cookie. She is just incredulous. What is he thinking? Taking her last cookie and sharing it with her. But again, taking the path of the higher ground, she just takes her half a cookie, struts off down the tarmac on her way to the airplane, and finishes her cookie as she's waiting to get on her plane. And when she finally sits down on her plane and is processing what the heck just happened, she's like, I don't know. I got to let it go. I got to let it go, whatever. So she digs back through her purse to find her book, grabs her book, and lo and behold, in the bottom of her purse is a box of 5 cookies. Accepting where people are at might just teach us that we don't even know where we are at in this pandemic. Our bag of 5 cookies might be at the bottom of our purse and not on the table. We just don't know where people are at and what they're going through. And I think it's fair to say that sometimes we don't know where we're at or what we're going through. And so, really want to invite you to embrace and live out that phrase that is so often a common call to worship or a welcome greeting in our United Churches of Christ, when we begin by saying, whoever you are and wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome in our community. When we can really accept that people are at different places specifically because of this pandemic and the many, many chaotic transitions that we have been through this year, the more ably people will be feeling welcomed to return at their own pace. And we want to accept people returning at their own pace and returning in whatever ways they want, which means accepting that people will continue to worship from home. I was just talking with a coaching client yesterday who had launched a big summer program series to get people to come back to their summer outdoor worship. And only 20 people showed up when they had had 90 for an Easter kind of early opening. And she was so disappointed. And one of the things that we talked through was how could she turn that disappointment into joy about how large her online worshiping numbers are. Some people are going to continue worshiping from home. And if we truly believe it when we say whoever you are and wherever you are, it means whether you are worshiping in your home or worshiping in our sanctuary or worshiping out on the lawn with your church family, you are welcome here. And just getting into that sense of acceptance that we don't know what it's going to look like in this new world. People may feel nervous. People will need reassurance. And the more that we can offer acceptance and love, the more easily people can begin to reconnect with their community. And if I were to add a fourth, this is a trilogy of webinars, so I'm going to take a break from the webinars, but if I were to add a fourth one, it would be about how do we rebuild community? And I think acceptance is the primary key to rebuilding our communities that have been separated from each other for so long and that have been meeting in such different ways than what we were used to. But I don't want to just talk about the parishioners that we're serving, the customers and the clients that you may be serving if you're running a business, or your students if you're a teacher, but also your workers in the field, your staff and your elected leaders may also feel nervous. I've heard from a lot of churches that have not had any live gatherings, that are just beginning their first ones, that it's the staff members who are the most afraid. Some of them haven't had their vaccines yet. Some of them have family members or children who aren't eligible for vaccines. And some of them are just nervous because church has been so different and it will continue to be different. So staff may need reassurance. Those of you who are laity on this call, your pastors need reassurance. I can tell you that they have lost sleep on almost a nightly basis since this pandemic began, worrying about whether or not they were doing enough, doing the right things, doing them at the right pace. So even though they're your pastoral leaders, please offer your words of affirmation and reassurance to them. And to your clergy, I would say that your key leaders, your lay leaders, your moderators, your congregational presidents, your church council chairpersons, and some of your program staff, they need your reassurance. We're all so busy trying to please each other and not quite sure what's right and what's wrong, that this acceptance piece, I think, is a critical component for reopening with grace and ease. As I mentioned, some staff and some leaders aren't eligible for the vaccines, or they have family members they're caring for who are of the vulnerable population. So they may need flexibility. For instance, if you're reopening for live worship, it might be that not all of your staff members can be in leadership in the live worship experience. So start thinking outside the box. Where do we need some dedicated staff or dedicated volunteer leadership for our virtual worshiping community, for our home-centered members? As we put acceptance and love at the foundation of this conversation, it will become easier to, um, to foresee and predict how best we can serve the whole congregation, not just our own little niche of those people who are showing up for the live gatherings. Now, I also know that we have to accept in the other way. I am vividly reminded that the United States is in a very privileged position about vaccine rates. As we look at what's happening in India, in Italy, around the world, we know that there are many countries and many cultures that aren't anywhere close to being safe in this pandemic. And even within our communities, you may be serving a community that has a higher vulnerable population. We still have many of our communities, particularly amongst the poorest of the poor, who don't yet have access to the vaccines and are just getting first shots if they're even able to get that first shot. And there's a lot of vaccine hesitation. And so when your people are getting impatient with you or judgmental because you're not opening fast enough or furious enough or in the ways they want you to open, just remember that everybody's going to need help understanding, and everybody's going to need help being accepting. If you are a reconciling congregation or an open and affirming congregation, then you've been through some special training about how we build consensus around inclusion. And I would invite you to think back to that process of becoming open and affirming or becoming reconciling, and what you learned about how to be more accepting and how to teach one another to be more accepting. And if you haven't gone through that training, then go through some conflict mediation training or give me a call and we'll have a quick coaching session on some ways that you can help others be accepting. When people come at you with the judgments and the anger and the frustration, if you're in leadership, you have two roles to play. One is to be accepting and patient with them, but also to be prophetic and teaching with them so that they will be accepting that others are coming to this at a different pace with a different set of needs. It is possible that somebody that's had two shots isn't even aware that there are people in your congregation who have not yet had one shot, that there are people who aren't yet eligible for a shot. And so one of the things about this pandemic and all of the social isolation that arose from the many, many months of being in shutdown and socially distanced is that many of us have become more self-absorbed and less aware of the community around us. And so anything we can do to help others begin accepting each other, the more we can strengthen the community that we're serving and the communities of which we're a part. Before I go on to the next point, I do want to bring up one other piece about acceptance, and I don't mean to be negative, but I also think it's important to accept that we don't yet know what's next. More changes are ahead of us. And I know there's a temptation to wish things would just go back to the way they were. And I invite you to begin celebrating that they will never go back to the way they were, as opposed to mourning or lamenting it. Many of us have been yearning for change and progress and more open and inclusive thinking and more thinking outside the box about creativity and outreach in ministry. And now we've been forced into it. And rather than yearning for the old days before there was a pandemic and before we had virtual options, I invite you to begin embracing and accepting the fact that pivoting and adjusting are now the new norm. And the thing that hasn't changed is that working together, teamwork is still critical. And so if you put those two things together, an acceptance that change is coming our way, change is with us here to stay, and yet the body of Christ, the team of God's people, remains the steadfast strength in order for us to address those changes and accept that in the change, the Holy Spirit moves. God offers us new options, a prophetic word comes, and we are guided in new and different directions. Then it becomes a little easier to adjust and adapt along the way. The other thing to accept is that your people are tired. I know we're really excited and wanting to make things work, but everybody's tired. Pastors, your laity are as tired as you are. Laity, your pastors are as tired as you are. We're tired of doing things differently. I'm sure many of you are tired of change. And so it's just accepting that might mean, you've heard me say it in other webinars, simplifying. When we talk about the next point about building, you'll hear me a lot talk about simplifying. But recognize that because we are tired, because many times we're frustrated, because we all face different challenges and situations that have arisen from this last year and a half, we will all navigate this new season differently. And we will all need rest and renewal. One of the best and most exciting things that I have been hearing in my coaching calls this spring is that every single pastor that I'm working with has vacation scheduled for this summer. And I hope, yes, Nancy, let's give them a big round of applause. And I would say, I hope all of you laity give yourselves a vacation. And I would like to give you a round of applause for scheduling vacations as well. None of us are indispensable, and it is okay to take time away. Because people are tired. This has been a very tiring journey. And the reopening, if we're going to reopen with grace and ease, we need to acknowledge that reopening in and of itself is tiring. How many of you with a thumbs up or a show of hands have had a reopening committee or team that's been meeting for weeks and weeks or months and months? How many of you have been just having these conversations with a million different changes? That in and of itself is tiring and exhausting. And so I want to acknowledge that as we face that reality and accept that reality, it brings me to our second point. And that is, we all need to build at the pace that's right for you, right for your team, and right for your setting. Build at your own pace, because if you don't, things could fall apart in this reopening season. We really are restarting a new and different church, and I would like you to be restarting something that doesn't fall apart. Paige, I think you've got a story to share for us.
Yeah, and I would say that the one danger is that things will fall apart, but the other danger is that they'll calcify, they'll solidify, they'll become inflexible. When our son was little, we needed a toy chest for him. So Mary and I went to IKEA and we found this beautiful toy chest that I would put together. And I'm a handy guy, but I know that, IKEA toy chests are put together with these little pegs and these little screws, and that's going to come loose with a little kid. So the best thing to do is to glue it. So every time I was putting this thing together, I glued this piece to this piece to this piece. And then I came upon a piece that looked entirely symmetrical, perfectly symmetrical. And the instructions gave no indication that it wasn't. So I put it in and I glued it. 30 minutes later, I'm at the end of my project and I realize I put the dumb thing in upside down. So now not only do I have to take it apart, but the glue has started to set. And I have to damn near break the thing to get it together again. And I was really pretty frustrated, and Mary and Michael had a good laugh. That wasn't until 2 months later when we realized we loved the toy chest so much that we wanted a second one. So sure enough, I put it together and I glued it together. And yes, I did the same stupid mistake the second time. And, it would have been better if I would have put it together without the glue. Because the second time I actually took a break for half an hour, got some food, and I really almost had to break the thing apart. So when you build, even if there's instructions, when you build, come up with a plan, follow your plan, but there's going to be a part of your plan that is like, does that mean we should do it this way, or does that mean we should do it that way? And should we glue it or should we not glue it? And sometimes the danger is not just that the toy chest is going to fall apart, but that it may actually get glued together in a wrong configuration. So be gentle with yourselves. Mary and Michael got a laugh out of the first time. They got a howl out of the second time that I put this thing together wrong. So we are gonna be building this thing together wrong, and just be ready to laugh when that happens.
Great insight. Thank you. You pointed out something that reminded me of a frustration I heard from many of you on the first webinar back at the end of April. I know there's been frustration, perhaps mostly amongst the United Methodists who are used to bishops and district superintendents telling us what to do. But in wanting them to tell you what to do, you're going exactly against what I'm suggesting here. Your setting is different, and you get to decide. And there's a freedom for those of us who aren't Congregationalists to finally have the freedom to build at the pace that's right for you, your team, and your people. Allows you to discern together. Who are you called to serve? In what ways are you called to serve them? How is God calling you to serve them in new ways in this new season? Now, how do you figure that out? Well, I want to invite you to build at a pace that's aligned with your specific setting. Some of you are coming from the same church. Within your church, you should be discussing together, where are we planted? You are planted in a different field than the church down the street from you. You are planted in a different field, even from a partner church that you perhaps have worked with for many, many years. You are built and planted to a specific community for a specific purpose. And that's the second thing. Make sure as you're building, you build in a way that is aligned with your primary purpose. This is a great opportunity to truly prioritize and build again according to your priorities. If you had programs before, or ministries before, or staff responsibilities before that weren't really serving your primary purpose, it's no time to add them back in. This is a rare opportunity to just go ahead and let those things go. It's okay to shed the things that are not aligned with your primary purpose and the highest priorities. And even if you're not going to shed them permanently, restart, as I was saying, one step at a time at the right pace. Restart the primary priorities first, the things that are aligned with your primary purpose. And building one step at a time is, I'm seeing us about 50-50 on this, but I think it's really important. As BJ was crafting that toy chest, he built it one step at a time. He took the unlikely and perhaps ill-advised step of adding glue before double checking that the plan actually had worked. And so as you're building one step at a time, trust your creativity. Don't feel stuck. If you put in a piece of the puzzle that isn't really making the puzzle work, pull that piece out and try something different. Trust also that the virtual gatherings that are working can continue to be virtual gatherings. What's the old phrase? If it isn't broke, don't fix it. It's okay. If virtual gatherings are working, you don't have to create a hybrid gathering. You don't have to create a live gathering. Let the virtual gatherings be a trustworthy part of your new ministry in this new season. And trust the virtual gatherings that enhance productivity. If it really helps, especially if you're a regional church or you serve in a busy metropolitan area where traffic is a problem, or you're in a rural area where people drive a long way in to get to your church, if virtual gatherings are helping leadership teams function more effectively and staff be more productive, if it's better for some staff to work from home the majority of the time, trust that. Because if we can be more vital in ministry, we can be more productive and give more of ourselves more freely in the virtual setting. That's a good sign that the virtual setting is something to continue. And then trust those virtual gatherings that are truly including and reaching people more fully. We found that in this virtual time that some things just work better virtually. Family members with children that were restless or had certain learning disabilities have sometimes found the virtual is easier than the in-person. Other people have found, oh, the virtual is so not working. My kids are so zoomed out. You have to listen to which of those is the case in your setting and go and address the need that is unique to your setting. And as you build one step at a time, I'm going to keep emphasizing the one step. Take one step forward. I have a friend who is reopening on July 11th, and they're reopening everything the same week. Their worship is opening, all their Bible studies are coming back to live, all of their small groups are coming back to live, and their meetings are coming back to live. And a month ago, when she and her very large staff planned this, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And when we had lunch last week, she just laid her head on the dining table and said, I am so tired. Because she's not taking one step forward, they're taking a dozen steps forward to prepare for a July 11th opening that's going to be grand, but grandiose enough that they're all overly exhausted and doubting whether or not they made the right decision. So I really suggest taking one step forward, adding one thing at a time. And as you're figuring out what your priorities are, prioritize what it takes to rebuild your community and to restore relationships. That's what makes us the body of Christ. It's where human beings really thrive, is in community. So as we think about those steps forward, let's take the steps forward that are going to rebuild the community. And I've heard that a lot from pastors who are choosing worship as the first step to reopen for live gatherings, because that's where the largest community is accustomed to gathering. And that's the other thing, is then step first toward those live gatherings that benefit most highly from being in person. Beach, can you tell us a little bit about how you and your team have kind of made those prioritizing decisions and taken some steps forward, steps back along the way?
Yeah. Before that, though, I want to say the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus said, you can't step into the same river twice, because it's not the same river and you're not the same person. And the people that want to start everything at once are trying to step into the same river twice. Even the people who think that going back to worship, just all together at one time with all people, it's going to be stepping back into the same river. It's the river's moved on. I mean, it's new water, new people. At Manhattan Beach Community Church, we've been really doing this one step at a time. So we decided, we would go ahead and we would gather outside. So we gathered outdoors, and we were able to live stream it so that the people who were watching virtually would see the same thing. And that was great. But we had coffee hour at a place where the kids could play and the adults could families could watch their kids. So that was not the same place that they normally had coffee hour. Well, this last week, we decided, you know what? We've got now a kids program that we added a kids program then. And then we moved coffee hour to the original location it was before on the patio, and people were much happier. And next week, we are actually going to meet in worship. It'll be with masks. But it's just one step at a time. And we've led a couple of groups on campus. And then there's one Bible study that was meeting out on the lawn, and now they're going to start meeting, and then we're going to start having, but groups are adding one at a time, and they're adding slowly, and we're admitting the community back into the building one at a time. And we've got a group that makes the decisions, and they sit down and they labor over each one of those. Does it make sense? Doesn't it make sense? One of the groups we called actually cried because they were going to be allowed back on campus. But it has been a process where, we've evaluated what's the next step. And this is a really hard time because we think in terms of binary, is safety binary? It's yes or no, but it really isn't. And I know people are frustrated at the CDC guidelines because they came up with this unbelievably complicated formula, whereas we don't listen to the CDC in most things. I mean, the CDC is really clear. You are not supposed to eat uncooked cookie dough. I have never made chocolate chip cookies in my life without eating some of the cookie dough. CDC says that women that are in childbearing years should never drink alcohol unless they're on birth control. I know my wife does not follow that policy. And she certainly didn't when she was younger. So we take our safety into account and say, and what the CDC could have said is, hey, what we've discovered is that if you're vaccinated, you have a very low chance of contracting COVID. If you do contract COVID, you have a very high likelihood that it'll be a very mild case with no symptoms, and you have a very low possibility of transmitting it to others. And so if you're in most situations, it doesn't make sense to wear masks in that situation. They could have said it that way, and they didn't. So we're left in a situation where we don't know what to do, and people don't know what to do, and they're whiplashed. And this goes back to the accepting. Just people are all over the place. They don't know what to do. They're judgmental about people who don't know what to do. But it's a little bit like the safety. Some people eat the cookie dough. Some people don't. I do. I eat the cookie dough. But building back one step at a time makes everybody feel safer. And that really is the main thing. Are we going to be safe? And it's better to go slow anyway, because you really are creating community one step at a time. So there are some people who are just glad to be back together again. There's others that it feels different to be back together. It feels strange after being separated from folk for a year to suddenly be together in a larger group. It's really traumatic for some folks. So going slow is just a better process, in my opinion.
Thank you. I will also say that if you are really struggling, I do have a kind of a special bonus offer for only 3 churches that I have room for, that if you want some individualized coaching and consulting on this, that BJ and I will meet with your either your regathering team or your church council or your staff leadership team or some combination. We have 3 regathering strategy sessions up to 2 hours each for you, where we will help you specifically craft your reopening plan, specific to what ministries need to reopen and how you might discern that. So I'll tell you more about that at the end of the call, but wanted to let you know that that is also available. Any other questions before I go to the communication point? Okay, well, I want to talk about communicating because, it's kind of like if you go to marriage counseling, almost everybody says, well, my marriage kind of started falling apart because we had a communication problem. Well, that sounds like, oh, great, we'll just communicate. And most churches find that, well, if we just communicated better, everything would be great. So I want to be pretty specific with you about what communication means when I make this my third point, because communicating is so much easier said than done. First, create a plan and communicate the plan. And if the plan this week is that coffee hour is on the lawn, let people know that this week. And then if it changes as you go, communicate the changes along the way. Those of you who are in leadership, and probably all of you who are on this call, have probably been talking about your plans for weeks, if not months. And those of you who are in charge of making it possible for people to regather in live settings have worked so hard that it might be easy for you to forget. that people outside of your small planning circle have no idea what the plan is. And I know it's frustrating, but you should also know that they're not reading their emails. They're not reading the church newsletter. And you can be frustrated about it, or we can go back to point A, except that people have never been great about reading church newsletters or emails or snail mails. And we all communicate and receive communication in different ways. So as you communicate as broadly as you can. It's a great time to use the church gossip chain. Make sure that those people who are the best gossipers and the best phone people know exactly what the plan is, because they'll get on the phone and tell all of their friends. But using your pre-recorded and virtual gatherings to communicate, using any of your informal or small group gatherings to communicate, and then of course communicating clearly as worship begins so that people know what the plan is so they can fully participate. When you're communicating, you want to communicate what your expectations are. I've visited several churches as they've begun reopening, and I am most comfortable if I walk in the door and it is clear to me if masks are required or not. I'm fully vaccinated, so I'm pretty comfortable walking in either world. But what I'm not comfortable with is if I don't know what your expectations are. It makes me feel excluded. It makes me feel nervous that I'm offending somebody by wearing my mask, which is what I always err on the side of wearing my mask if I'm not sure. But if I don't know what the expectations are, I don't know. Are like people judging me because I'm wearing my mask? I'm assuming it's the right thing to do, even though it's outdoor worship. But if you let me know what the expectations are, I feel more welcomed. What the guidelines are. Am I allowed to pick up a bulletin? Am I recycling that bulletin? Am I allowed to put cash in the plate? Is there a plate? I don't know what the expectations and the guidelines are if you don't tell me. Can I shake hands? Are we not shaking hands? Are we hugging? Are we not hugging? And I know that we can't force people to follow those expectations and guidelines. That goes back to accept. But people live in community more easily where there are rules. My mom used to always tell me this when I was a little girl. I resisted a lot when I was a teenager, but by the time I became an adult, I realized Mama was right. It's easier to live in community when we know what the rules are and we've all kind of agreed to live with them. And then also communicate what the options are. If there is live worship happening and I'm not comfortable coming to live worship, make sure you've communicated with me what my options are for still being spiritually fed. Is there a virtual option? Is there a pre-recorded? Is there a midweek gathering on Zoom? How am I going to be fed? What are my options? If there isn't live Sunday school, how are my children going to be fed? If there are live small groups, but I'm not ready to come back to a live small group, is there a virtual small group option? All of us are going at our own pace. We have different things. We want people to know what are the live options, what are the virtual options, what are the new options? And along with that, where are the things that they're allowed to invite people to? And where are the things that they're required to have a reservation? Everybody's all over the map on this. When we first started reopening, I think we all assumed we were going to have to be on this strict, really very careful reservation system. And now most of us have moved away from that. But it's still unclear, I think, for most of our parishioners, which gatherings are they allowed to invite people to? And we have a rare opportunity to start building and growing our churches. People are spiritually hungrier than they have ever been, probably since 9/11. And this is an opportunity for us to be of great service as the body of Christ, to really reach out and feed those whose spiritual hunger is at an all-time high, that we might really give them that soul food that they need. So we want to make sure that our own people know, where can they invite people to? Are they allowed to invite people to the Zoom fellowship hour? Is worship open to everybody or only to members? Is worship open if you have a reservation, even if you're not a member? Those are the kinds of things people are very unsure. And I will tell you that even as an ordained pastor, when I see something exciting going on at a friend's church, in the old days, I would have immediately forwarded it to somebody that I thought needed it. And now I have to think, is that open to the public? I'm not really sure. So if I'm not sure and I'm kind of immersed and I'm pretty darn self-confident, then you can bet that many, many of your members and friends and community don't know where they're allowed or not allowed to invite and include. And so let's communicate that as clearly as possible, because this is an opportunity to reach out and show God's love and grace. But we want to do that in the ways that everyone feels safe and comfortable. As I mentioned before, don't just depend on your formal communication, but on your informal. And remember, don't just communicate internally amongst the church membership. Let the larger community know. I wouldn't suggest inviting the larger community with a newspaper ad your very first week of live worship in the sanctuary. But once you have it down to a fine science, and you feel comfortable and safe, and you know you've got space, then let the community know that you are welcoming on-site guests. Or if you're not, let the community know where you are welcoming them virtually. So we want to make sure we communicate outside of our church walls, not just inside of our church walls. And as I mentioned earlier about people not reading their newsletters and their emails, I'm going to do the most dangerous thing of all. I'm going to ask you to assume something, which normally is bad advice. But I want you to assume that people will not know. No matter how much you have communicated, go ahead and assume that people will show up not knowing that they were supposed to bring a mask, or people will show up not knowing they were supposed to have a reservation, or people won't show up thinking they had to have a reservation. It is very safe in this point in time to assume that people will not know, and probably the majority of your people will not know. And I know that can be frustrating, but if we go back to point number one, accept that to be the reality. It just means those of us in leadership communicating lovingly, consistently, and frequently will really help to include more and more people.
I want to emphasize the flexibility part, because when we started meeting live, it was really important to me that the people that had been watching virtually would have the same experience and continue to, so that it wouldn't be, church light. So since we were going to have fellowship time after service, it was really important to me that we have virtual fellowship time like we'd had in the past. And that was a very important thing that I was adamant that we would do. And then what happened was we had our first service and no one showed up for the virtual fellowship, because all of the people that had been on the virtual fellowship time before really just wanted to be together. So they all were at church and no one came online. So it was like, well, we'll do one more week of having no one on the call. And then we just dropped it. So be ready to drop something, even though you think it's a good idea and you're philosophically and ecclesiologically committed to it. Sometimes it's just best to drop something if you don't need it.
Thank you for that reminder, and I appreciate your honesty, because sometimes we don't want to drop it or admit to something like that because we feel like it's a failure. Mm-hmm. Similarly, I had someone who tried picnic church this past week. They're meeting outdoors and asked everybody to bring a box lunch. And other than the staff members, only one person brought a boxed lunch. They had 25 or 30 worshipers show up, but only one person brought a boxed lunch. Everybody else just scattered and went straight home. They were still nervous about being together. And this pastor was feeling like a failure. And I said, it was just information. Flexibility is key. We don't know where people are going to be at things. In the old days, when we tried something new, we didn't know if it would work, but we probably had more metrics and familiarity and predictability then than we have now. So we will more likely try new things and they won't yield the results we expect. They'll either yield 91 people when we're expecting 9, or they'll yield 9 when we were hoping for 91. And so we just learn from that. So I appreciate that honesty, Beej, that, Zoom fellowship that I insisted was so important, I guess is not that important. We just don't know. And that's a really great way to notice what you're noticing and then respond with flexibility to what you're noticing. Which brings me to my last series of points, which if you were on last month's webinar, you saw this already. Whatever you do, just step forward in faith. One of my favorite phrases is take imperfect action. Try the Zoom fellowship call and see if anybody shows up. Try the picnic church and see if anybody shows up. And if not, that's okay. experiment and adapt. And as BJ mentioned earlier on this call, laugh and have fun. Laughter is so healing, and we haven't had enough chance to laugh together in the last year and a half. So as we experience those unexpected results that we might otherwise deem as a failure, let's turn them into comedy club and laugh together, because we can finally be together while we're laughing, which is a great joy. And trust that God will guide the way. At the end of the day, this isn't your church. It isn't my church. It isn't your pastor's church or your moderator's church or your lay leader's church. This is God's church. And God is in charge of our reopening, not us. God is in charge of whatever restarting we're doing, whatever new rebuilding we're doing. Our job is to listen and respond and follow where we discern that God is leading. And so just keep moving forward. Once again, I'm going to quote my other favorite prophet, Walt Disney, talking about his own experimentation of the Disney company when he said, around here, we don't look backwards for very long. We keep moving forward, opening new doors and doing new things because we are curious. And curiosity keeps leading us down new paths. Or in the words of Lewis and Carroll, curiouser and curiouser. I think that as we are curiouser and curiouser, we will discover some beautiful new ways that God is leading us into the future. This is a time of liminality, when we don't really know where we've been and we don't really know where we're going. And liminality can be, is also used often to describe that time near death, when the mystical starts happening. And so if we think about this not as a time of dis-ease, but a time of ease and grace, when the Spirit is as close as our very breath, we might find that, the discoveries along the way are God's guidance along the way. So as you know, I'm Mary Scifres from Mary Scifres Ministries. And around here, we also don't look backwards for very long. We are always looking forward. My primary area of coaching and consulting is around the area of transition. So if you're needing some guidance in this time of change, in this season of liminality, I hope that you will contact me and talk about how we might be of service to help you with your coaching and consulting needs. And again, I have 3 regathering strategy sessions to meet with your full team for a consult for only $497. If you want to schedule that session, it'll be first come, first serve, and you email Carrie, admin@maryscifres.com. Carrie, go ahead and give them a wave so they know who they're emailing. This is Carrie Kellogg, my administrative assistant, and just my right hand in all things Mary Scifres Ministry. So thank you. Arlene, thank you for being here. I want to thank all of you for being here. I hope that you find that you can reopen with grace and ease, that you and your people can sense God's guidance and truly trust that you are moving forward as the people of God you are called to be. And I pray God's blessings on you as you move forward.
Yeah, thank you. I really love what you guys lifted up about the reminder of one step at a time. It is so easy, particularly when communicating to other people. I have a big picture in my head, but that doesn't mean that they, get it, right? Or even I communicated it. So I'll tell you, I was taking tons of notes. So I'm preparing for the next volley into communication with everybody. And just that reminder to just recognize that no one is going to do what you're going to expect them to do.
Right.
And to just embrace it.
Amen. We might as well embrace it because it is the reality. Yes.
Just embrace it because, they're not going to bring masks. They're going to want coffee. They're going to bring a donut, so it's just a really good reminder to remember that really it is God's church and it'll work out.
I know we can't stop this. That's right. God's charge.
Just let it go. So thank you for this. I hope you both have a wonderful afternoon. Hi, Carrie. Thank you for all your work. Thank you, BJ. Bye.
And thanks for reminding us, communicating one step at a time also equally important.
I tend to skip that.
I think we all, especially like you say, when we're immersed in it, it's so easy to communicate the big picture and forget.
Yeah.
People can.
And I'm like, what do you mean you don't understand?
Yeah.
One step. Well, thank you. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye.
Thanks for being here, Lida. This ends our content for today. I'll stay on in case anybody has any last minute questions for about 10 more minutes, but otherwise, thank you for being with us and blessings upon your journey. Take good care. Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for being here, John. Thank you.